press it. Don't know what happened. So there it is. Alrighty. So we're good to go. I don't know why it didn't go live by itself, but hey, we're here. So tonight's Teaching Tip Tuesday is a special one because formative assessment really is a big deal, especially if you're working with below grade level learners, special education students, or any of those students that need more than just the basic instruction. So that's what this is going to be about tonight. So if you are watching this on the replay, you can catch my live stream Teacher Tip Tuesday on YouTube. That's where all of my YouTube videos are housed in. And once you're over there, don't forget to like and subscribe the videos. It helps with sharing the love and getting the message out. So, and if you're interested in knowing when I upload videos or go live, definitely click that bell button. It's that notification button, and it lets you know when I go live anytime during the day or night, like tonight, or when I upload videos. And sometimes I upload little short clips. I have one on my website, my YouTube channel, which is distributive property explained in 2 minutes. Just little things, tips for you all. So don't forget to like and subscribe if you're interested in that. So let's go ahead and get started. So one of the things I did with my live stream was to change the format of it. I changed some of the branding. I changed how I talked about different topics. I changed everything. So what I'm going to do is basically a problem and solution type of format. So a lot of the problems that I see with formative assessment is that teachers tend to see formative assessment as something separate from the actual teaching. And it's not. Formative assessment is a process or a thing that we do throughout the lesson. We look for cues from the students where they're not really actually getting the concept. And what we do is we look for those cues and then adjust the instruction. That's what formative assessment is. So I know a lot of teachers get caught up in the process of, teaching and learning, and I get that. But the goal is for the kids to actually learn the actual content, and which would be mastery. But if you're not looking for those cues in dialogue, observations, the student work, and just really their conversations, then that is difficult to really make any adjustments or even plan for your tier 2 instruction, which is your small group instruction. And formative assessment is that tool that will actually move the needle, because if you're paying attention, say for instance, you're teaching a skill and you have half of your students getting it. Why would you reteach that skill to the whole class when you have half of the class that has it? You can make notes about where the lesson is not explicit enough for that group of students and plan your instruction around the dialogue, the student work, and the conversations that the students are having in the classroom. That's why the conversations are important. I have a book that I recommend all of the time, and it talks about being intentional about your conversations. And it has a framework that you can use that actually talks about being intentional about those conversations. But here is the thing: if you're doing all the talking, you can't, there's no formative assessment that is taking place. And I know a lot of teachers, especially when they get dinged on their evaluations, they tend to say, well, I wasn't talking that much. The goal is to have the kids do the math and talk about the math, not you give them everything, then they're really not learning. So that formative assessment, where the kids are having conversations and you're making observations about what they're saying, because here's the thing: a lot of times we don't really take seriously what our students are saying. We'll correct them, and then it was like, yeah, that's what I meant. Well, no, that's really not what you meant. So that's why Flipgrid is an excellent tool for your formative assessment. So we're going to talk about this book that I actually love. I am currently reading it. And it's called Formative Assessment in Practice. And if you're watching this live stream on YouTube, I put the link to the book in the description. And it's a really, really, really good book. I'm going to take you to the table of contents. So a lot of the form, when I bought this book, because I'm in the process of going through my national board certification, and I was looking for a formative assessment book. Now, one of my things, a lot of my processes and the stuff that I do in my class is not documented. I'm gonna be honest with you. I'm horrible at that. So when people tell me to explain how I'm doing that, I I have the process, but it's more of an intuitive process rather than a documented one. So this book is a really good resource. It really walks you through what formative assessment is, and it talks about the community of practice. If you're not collaborating with other teachers, then you're missing out on that community of practice, because you get to talk about different things. And that's what my Math Intervention Academy is really about. It's a community where we strengthen our practices through collaboration and learning strategies. The collaboration piece is very important. So the chapter 2, they talk about applying learning progressions, and you can just look at the rest of them. But that's where I am with the learning progressions. And if you don't know what learning progressions are, it's similar to the vertical alignment in our math curriculum. And the funny thing about it, while I was reading this book, it talked about standards versus learning progressions. And it kind of taught me something new as well, because I use the standards to guide my the way that I put lessons together with my students. Because if you follow me, I'm a math interventionist, and what I do is I don't have a grade level. Math intervention does not have a grade level, and a lot of teachers tend to think, well, we're high school and intervention is on grade level. No, it's not. That's remediation. There's a difference between remediation and intervention. Intervention, you start where the students are. And that's what this learning progression is really all about. So, you're probably saying, if you're not familiar with it, what is a learning progression? And to be honest with you, a learning progression is what students have to do, say, or write to master a learning goal. So it's the progression to mastery. It's a guide. It's a map. But with learning progressions, you have to know what comes before and after that skill so you can move the learning along. This is why I harp so much on teachers' math content knowledge. What happens is if teachers if you've only taught one grade level, and even if you've been teaching 20 years and you've taught fourth grade for 20 years, how do you ever know what the students are supposed to know before they come to fourth grade and after fourth grade? Because that's the issue with gifted and talented learners. A lot of teachers don't know where they can move the students and how deep they can go with the content, because if you're not well versed in the nuances of the concepts, then you're not going to know how to move those students along. And that's what a learning progression is. And it's more so important with intervention because last week I talked about cycles. I do interventions in 2-week cycles because I have found over time that's about all I need, because the students are not blank slates. They just have, like I said, all these concepts, but there's no order. That's why it's important for teachers like yourself and me to connect the learning to the students' experiences. And you have to know also what type of learning experiences the students have had in the past. That's why in my Math Intervention Academy, again, the first thing that I have teachers do is set up a learning profile. Know what kind of history your students have. Because if you are assuming and making assumptions about students learning, it's going to fall apart, because a student that has missed a lot of days versus a student who actually struggles, those are two different students. That means that one student may get the instruction that they need if their intent is approved and take off. But that other student is really a student that struggles, and the achievement may not be as quick as the other student. And when you thought that both of them struggled, well, one had a different issue. That's why knowing your students' learning experiences and how they feel about the mathematics is important, and what really drives them. Like the other day, I had to um, I had to adjust my instruction. I was teaching domain and range, and I talked about this in my intervention group. I had to adjust my instruction because in the little activity that I was going to do, the students were going to have to create a graph. And anytime you have your kids create anything, that's at the highest level of bloom. So I was asking them what was independent and dependent. Well, they couldn't tell me. There's no way that I could have gone on, because in the activity, they had to be able to identify the independent and dependent variables. So what I did is put together a little mini lesson, and I had the kids, it was in Padlet because my students are still virtual. It was in Padlet, and I closed that gap real quickly with some conversations, and then it led up to applying the independent and dependent variables mathematically. We started with real world, independent in politics, dependent in taxes, and moved on. So once I did that, the kids had a very good understanding. And then I used the Moby Max activity or lesson to see if they really got it in. A lot of my students really understood it. So now I can move on to my lesson. That's what learning progressions do. It helps you to identify gaps in learning. So when you're putting together your intervention and you have a skill that you want to address, in order for those students to actually learn the skill or master the skill or meet your learning goal, you have to have a progression. What does it look like? For example, adding fractions with unequal denominators. I'm going to tell you, I counted how many steps it took to possibly solve a fraction, a two mixed numbers. It takes about 6 steps. Do you know on average, most kids only get to the second step? You're lucky if they get to the third step. So you have to know what that first and second step looks like and then bridge it so the kids can persevere to actually solve the problem. Because a lot of times my students used to fall apart. They used to fall apart with the simplifying the fraction at the end because they couldn't understand why it was wrong. But it was. It was wrong because it's not as simple as form. So you have to know what it looks like. But what formative assessment actually helps you with that, it helps you to make adjustments and make decisions about instruction based on how the students are performing at that time. Now, if you're not looking for these things, and if you're not starting with connecting the students' learning experiences with a conceptual foundation, you are going to not really have mastery. Everything that you do should start conceptually, especially with the math intervention, because a lot of our students are still visual. And what you're trying to do is move them through the continuum of learning. And the thinking should change over time. If you have kids that are actually saying the same thing that they were saying before your intervention, you pretty much can bet that that student did not did not master your learning goal. And that's what formative assessment and learning progressions together, it helps you to meet that target and meet that learning goal. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of recap what I talked about today in this Teaching Tip Tuesday episode about formative assessment. It is a way to make decisions about instruction while the instruction is taking place. It is not summative assessment. Summative assessment takes place after instruction has happened. Now, the way that you can use formative assessment is through dialogue. You can also use it through observations. You can use it through student work. A lot of teachers like exit tickets. I'm not a fan of exit tickets. They pile up and they get lost. You can use a Google form because that's what I'm in the process because I've had to change. I used to use Plickers a lot, but since my kids are virtual, I don't have the same dialogue that I used to have with them. So I'm depending on written form and video. So we're going to see how the video works out. But the written form has been working so far with the Padlet. So that's formative assessment. How do learning progressions help us with formative assessment? Learning progressions actually lay out the map of what a student is supposed to do, say, or write about a particular skill or about the learning goal that you are having you're targeting for your students to close those gaps. And if you don't know what it looks like when they're writing or what they have to do or what they need to say, then there's a much deeper issue when it comes to that, because if you don't know what it looks like, then and your kids don't know what it looks like I tell the teachers at my school or other teachers, YouTube PD is a real thing, because sometimes you have to really go back and really understand what you're talking about. In order to move kids along, it is not a superficial process. And you're constantly looking for what needs to be said, written, or done for them to master that concept. And when you couple that together with the formative assessment and the learning progression, you have mastery. And it's a beautiful thing. And it's a messy thing. On my Instagram account, I was talking about, embracing, the messiness of teaching. Teaching is messy. It's not cute. It's not an Instagram photo. The end of it is, but while you're in the midst of it, it can be frustrating because you're like the doctor of education. You are assessing and diagnosing and coming up with a pedagogical solution for learning. That's really what you're doing. And it's messy. Like it really is. Because when I did my lesson last week, I didn't know if it was going to work or not. I was just hoping that it worked. I knew my students did well with real life connections, and I was just going to go with that. And it turned out really well, but that's not always the case. So, that is all I have for you all for Teaching Tip Tuesday. I hope that you enjoyed this. If you have any comments, leave them in the comment section. If you're watching this on a replay, introduce yourself. Let me know what you thought. If you have any questions or comments. And guess what? I'll see you all in my next live stream.